It was already dark when Tanya finally left the diner that night. The street outside was quiet and the air felt heavy with the smell of rain. Her feet hurt from standing all day and her back ached from lifting trays, but she smiled anyway. She had just finished a double shift, and even though she was exhausted, she felt proud of herself. Every long hour meant more money for her little boy. Tanya was a single mother trying to make things work. Life hadn't been easy since her husband walked out 2 years ago, leaving her to raise her son alone. But she had learned to manage one day at a time. She rented a small apartment in a quiet part of town, worked at the diner, and took cleaning jobs on weekends. It wasn't much, but it kept food on the table and the bills paid. She looked up at the cloudy sky as she walked toward her old silver car parked near the corner. Her feet splashed in a small puddle and she laughed softly at herself. The sound of her keys jingling broke the silence. It was almost midnight and she just wanted to get home, shower, and see her son sleeping peacefully. As she drove down the road, she turned the radio on low. The music filled the quiet car and she started humming along without thinking. The road was empty and the soft glow from the dashboard lights gave her a sense of calm. She thought about how proud her son would be tomorrow when she'd surprise him with the new school shoes she'd saved up for. But as she turned onto a main street, she saw red and blue lights flashing in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run any lights. Her car was old but clean. Still, she felt that tight, nervous feeling in her chest that came every time she saw a police car behind her. She slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The police car stopped right behind her, lights still flashing. Tanya took a deep breath, rolled down her window, and waited. She reminded herself to stay calm. She had done nothing wrong. A tall officer walked up to her window, shining a flashlight into her face. "License and registration," he said sharply. His tone wasn't friendly, and it made her heart race a little faster. "Of course, officer," she said softly, reaching for her purse. "May I ask what this is about?" "Just give me your license first," he said again, his voice firmer this time. She handed it over carefully. The officer glanced at it, then looked at her again with narrowed eyes. "This your car?" "Yes, sir. I bought it last year," she said. He frowned. "Funny, doesn't look like something you'd afford on a waitress salary." The words stung. She wanted to say something to defend herself, but she knew better. She just nodded slightly and stayed quiet. Another officer came up on the other side of the car, shining his light inside. "You been drinking tonight?" he asked. "No, sir. I'm just coming home from work," Tanya replied. The first officer walked around to the back of her car, shining the light over the license plate. The second one kept staring into the car, his flashlight passing over her grocery bags on the back seat. "You sure you don't have anything illegal in here?" Tanya shook her head quickly. "No, sir. Nothing like that." The first officer came back, his face serious. "Step out of the car." She hesitated, unsure what to do. "Officer, can you please tell me what's going on? Did I do something wrong?" He raised his voice a little. "I said step out of the car." Her hands trembled slightly as she unbuckled her seatbelt. The rain had started to fall lightly, tapping on the roof. She stepped out slowly, clutching her jacket around her. The road was quiet and the light from the police car made everything look harsh and cold. One officer asked her to walk to the front of her car. She did as she was told. She tried to stay calm, tried to believe this would all be cleared up soon. They started asking questions. Where she worked, where she was going, why she was driving this late. She answered each one politely, hoping they would just let her go. But their tone didn't soften. One of them kept looking at her as if she was lying. "You sure this car isn't stolen?" he asked again. Tanya looked down, trying not to cry. "It's mine. I have all the papers in the glove box. You can check if you want." The officer turned to his partner. "Go ahead and take a look." The second officer opened the car door and began searching through her things without asking. Tanya felt her throat tighten. "Please be careful," she said quietly. "I have my son's things in there." He gave her a sharp look but said nothing. She stood in the rain, shivering, her heart pounding in her chest. Cars passed by once in a while, slowing down when they saw the flashing lights, then speeding off again. She wished someone would stop. She wished someone would help. After a few minutes, the officer came back out holding a small brown paper bag. "What's this?" Tanya looked at it and felt panic rush through her. "That's my lunch. Just leftover food from work." He opened it and saw a sandwich and an apple. He frowned as if disappointed, then tossed it back inside. The first officer scribbled something on his notepad, then looked up at her again. "You seem nervous." She swallowed hard. "I'm just scared, sir. I don't understand what's happening." He gave a small laugh that wasn't kind. "If you haven't done anything wrong, you've got nothing to be scared of." Tanya nodded quickly, though she knew that wasn't true. People like her knew that even when you did everything right, things could still go wrong. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. The rain grew heavier. Her hair was soaked. Her clothes clung to her skin. She could feel tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. Finally, the officer walked back to his car and talked on his radio for a while. The other one stayed close, keeping an eye on her. She looked down at the ground, whispering a prayer under her breath. She just wanted to go home to her son. After what felt like forever, the officer returned. "Your story checks out," he said flatly. "You can go." Tanya looked up in disbelief. "That's it?" He shrugged. "Yeah, watch your driving next time." She didn't say another word. She just walked back to her car, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. When she pulled back onto the road, her heart was still racing. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every time she saw headlights in her mirror, she flinched. She kept replaying everything in her mind. His words, the way they looked at her, the cold rain running down her neck. When she finally reached her apartment complex, she sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. She took deep breaths, trying to calm herself. Her hands were still trembling. She climbed the stairs quietly and unlocked her door. Her son was asleep on the couch, a blanket half covering him, the TV still on. She smiled faintly, her heart softening. She turned off the TV and covered him properly. For a while, she just sat beside him, watching his peaceful little face. He was only 7, full of energy and dreams. She didn't want him to grow up afraid of the world like she was right now. Later, in her small bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes looked tired, her hair damp and messy. She touched her cheek where a raindrop had dried, and for the first time she let herself cry. It wasn't just fear. It was frustration, anger, sadness. She had worked so hard, stayed honest, done everything right. Yet she was treated like she was nothing. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. She thought about calling her brother, but decided against it. He was busy in Washington, working with government offices. She didn't want to bother him with her problems. But as she drifted to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about how helpless she had felt on that road. The next morning, the sun came through the thin curtains, lighting up the room. Tanya got up quietly and made breakfast. She smiled at her son as he came into the kitchen, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Morning, sweetheart," she said. "Morning, Mom," he said, smiling. "Can I have pancakes?" She laughed softly. "If we still have mix, you can." He ran to the cupboard to check, and she stood there watching him, her heart full. For a moment, everything felt normal again. But when she drove him to school that morning, she noticed a police car parked near the corner. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She tried not to show it, but her son noticed. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine, baby," she said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." After dropping him off, she sat in the car for a while before heading to work. The events from the night before kept flashing in her mind. At the diner, she tried to stay cheerful, greeting customers, taking orders, smiling when she didn't feel like it. But her co-workers noticed something was off. "You okay, Tanya?" one of them asked during a break. She nodded quickly. "Just didn't sleep much last night," but inside she was still shaking. Every time the doorbell rang or someone raised their voice, she jumped. That evening, when she drove home, she noticed something strange. A black and white car was behind her again. Not close, but following her for a few blocks. She turned right. The car turned right too. Her stomach tightened. Finally, after she made another turn, the car kept going straight. She exhaled slowly, her hands gripping the steering wheel. By the time she reached home, she felt exhausted again, not just from work, but from fear she couldn't shake. She tucked her son into bed that night and kissed his forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, Mom," he murmured sleepily. She sat by the window afterward, watching the quiet street below. The same thought kept circling in her mind. Why had they stopped her? Why had they treated her like that? She hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe it was a mistake, she told herself. Maybe they were just doing their job. But deep down she knew better. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they stayed. That night she barely slept. A few days later, while driving home again, she saw flashing lights in her mirror. Her chest tightened instantly. She slowed down and pulled over. When the officer walked up to her window, she recognized him. It was the same man from before. Her breath caught in her throat. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Evening. We meet again." Her hands tightened on the wheel. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Routine check," he said casually. "Step out of the car." Tanya's mind raced. It was happening again. Her throat went dry. "Can I ask why?" He leaned closer, his eyes cold. "You can ask after you step out." The second officer appeared again, standing near the back of her car. Tanya looked at the clock on her dashboard. It was 10:40 p.m. The street was quiet. No cars. No witnesses. She took a deep breath and whispered a silent prayer. She stepped out slowly, hoping it wouldn't get worse. The first officer walked around her car, looking at the license plate again. The second one stayed close, his hand resting on his belt. She felt her pulse racing. "Sir, please," she said softly. "I haven't done anything wrong," he didn't answer. He looked her up and down, then smirked slightly. "You really should be more careful who you talk back to." Tanya froze. Something inside her snapped, not in anger, but in quiet determination. She realized this wasn't going to stop unless she did something, unless someone found out what was happening, but she also knew she couldn't do it alone. When she got home that night, shaken, scared and tired of pretending she was fine, she sat at the kitchen table staring at her phone. She had been holding back from calling her brother for days, not wanting to sound weak, but now she didn't care. Her hands trembled as she dialed his number. The line rang once, twice, then his familiar voice came through. "Hey, sis. Everything okay?" She took a shaky breath. "No," she whispered. "Something's happening. I need your help." Her voice cracked on the last word. And though she didn't know it yet, that phone call would change everything. When Tanya ended the call, her hands were still trembling. She sat there in silence, staring at the phone, listening to the low hum of her refrigerator. She didn't know what to expect. She hadn't spoken to her brother in a while, and she had never asked him for help before, but tonight she couldn't hold it in anymore. Her brother Daniel had always been the strong one in the family. He was calm, confident, and unshakable. Even when they were kids, he was the one who stood up for her. Their parents used to say he was born to protect people, and he had proved them right. Over the years, he had built a career in law enforcement, working his way up from local investigations to federal service. Tanya was proud of him, even if they didn't talk much anymore. That night, when she heard his steady voice on the phone, something inside her broke. She told him everything. The first traffic stop, the way the officers treated her, how they followed her again days later. Her voice shook as she spoke, and she tried not to cry, but her emotions poured out. Daniel didn't interrupt her. He listened quietly, every word sinking deep. When she finished, there was silence for a few seconds. Then his voice came back, low but firm. "Tanya, I need you to listen carefully," he said. "Don't drive anywhere alone for a while. Don't talk to anyone about this yet. I'll take care of it." She tried to speak, but he stopped her gently. "You did the right thing calling me. Just stay calm. Everything's going to be fine." After the call ended, Tanya felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She trusted her brother, but she also knew he didn't take things lightly. If he said he would handle it, he meant it. But what would that mean for her? That night, she didn't sleep much. She kept replaying the scene in her head, the lights, the rain, the cold looks from the officers. Every sound outside made her jump. Early the next morning, she dropped her son off at school and went to work, trying to act normal. But she could feel eyes on her all day. Maybe it was her imagination, but it felt like people were watching, whispering. Her boss even asked if she was okay. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Just tired." The truth was, she felt drained. Her heart was heavy, her mind clouded. She wanted to move on, pretend nothing happened, but she couldn't. Every time she passed a police car on the street, her pulse quickened. Every flash of red and blue lights in the distance made her stomach twist. Late that afternoon, as she was wiping down a counter at the diner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "I need you to meet me at home after work. Don't tell anyone. Please be careful." She read it twice. Her heart began to race. When she got home that evening, Daniel's car was already parked in front of her building. It had been years since he visited her here. Seeing him step out in his dark suit and calm posture made her feel both proud and nervous. He gave her a gentle hug. "You look tired," he said. She smiled weakly. "I guess I am." Inside, they sat at the kitchen table. Tanya poured him coffee, and for a moment they both sat quietly. Then Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out a small notebook. "I made some calls," he said. "I looked into the precinct that stopped you. There have been complaints before, profiling, false stops, intimidation, but nothing stuck because there wasn't enough proof." Tanya looked at him, her hands folded in her lap. "So what happens now?" He leaned forward. "Now we make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." She hesitated. "But I don't want trouble, Daniel. I just want to live my life. I don't want anyone coming after me." He gave a small smile. "You won't have to worry about that. You've been through enough. I'll handle this quietly." For a moment, she saw the same protective brother she remembered from their childhood. The one who once stood up to bullies for her. The one who used to tell her everything would be okay. Still, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. "What if they find out it was me who reported them?" "They won't," he said. "Not until it's too late for them to do anything about it." The next few days felt strangely calm. Tanya went to work, took her son to school, and tried to live normally. But underneath that calm, things were already moving. At Daniel's office in Washington, he made several discreet calls to contacts in internal affairs and oversight departments. He didn't use his title or make demands. He simply shared facts, mentioned concerns, and quietly pushed for a deeper look. He wasn't acting as her brother now. He was acting as an investigator who understood how to get things done without creating noise. Meanwhile, Tanya started noticing small changes around her. The same patrol cars she used to see near her neighborhood weren't there anymore. No one followed her. The street felt lighter, the air easier to breathe. One night, after putting her son to bed, she sat on the couch, staring at the soft glow of the lamp. She thought about how close she had come to breaking down completely. For years, she had been strong for her child, for herself, for her future. But that night on the roadside had nearly shattered her. She realized how easily things could go wrong, how powerless one person could feel in front of a uniform. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Daniel," even though he wasn't there to hear it. But peace didn't last long. A week later, while she was at work, two unfamiliar men walked into the diner. They weren't customers. They wore plain suits, carried folders, and spoke quietly to her manager. Then they turned to her. "Ms. Brown?" one of them asked politely. She nodded, feeling uneasy. "We're from the Department of Justice," he said. "We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind." Her manager looked surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, sir," one of the men said smoothly. "This won't take long." They sat in a corner booth, and Tanya's hands trembled slightly as she folded them on the table. "Ms. Brown," the first man said kindly, "we understand you may have experienced an incident involving local law enforcement last week. We're conducting a review. Anything you can tell us would help." Tanya hesitated. "Did my brother send you?" They exchanged a quick glance. "We were informed through official channels," the second man said. She nodded slowly, trying to calm her breathing. She told them everything, carefully but honestly. The men listened without interrupting, occasionally writing notes. When she finished, they thanked her and handed her a card. "If you notice anything unusual, please contact us immediately," one of them said. When they left, her coworkers gathered around her, curious but respectful. She just smiled weakly and said, "It's nothing. Just some questions." But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. Things were changing. That evening, Daniel called again. "They spoke to you today?" "Yes," she said. "They were polite. Good, don't worry. You won't have to deal with them again unless you want to. Just focus on your life and your son. The rest will take care of itself." For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to relief. She started sleeping better. Her appetite returned. Her smile felt real again. But one night, just as she began to think everything was truly behind her, there was a knock at her door. It was nearly midnight. Her heart jumped. She looked through the peephole and saw two officers standing there. She froze. They weren't the same ones as before, but their presence made her blood run cold. She opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" "Evening, ma'am," one of them said. "We're just following up on a report about your car. Mind if we ask a few questions?" Tanya's voice was calm, but inside she was shaking. "I already spoke to investigators. Everything should be cleared." The officers exchanged a quick look. "We're aware," one said. "Just routine follow-up." Tanya hesitated. Then she stepped aside slightly. "You can ask from here." They nodded, asked a few vague questions about her vehicle and her whereabouts that night, then left. But their visit unsettled her deeply. The next morning she called Daniel. "They came again," she said softly. There was silence for a few seconds. Then his voice came through, calm but cold. "They shouldn't have." That same day, Daniel drove back to the city. He met with internal investigators in person this time. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried weight. He reminded them that accountability wasn't optional. He didn't pull rank, but he didn't need to. By the end of that week, disciplinary actions had begun quietly at the local department. The officers involved in Tanya's stops were placed on temporary leave pending investigation. Tanya found out later, not from her brother, but from a neighbor who worked at the courthouse. She sat on her couch that evening processing the news. She didn't feel joy. Not yet. Just a quiet sense of justice beginning to stir. That night she called Daniel to thank him. "I don't know how you do it," she said softly. "You always find a way." He chuckled lightly. "That's my job. And you did your part too. You stood your ground." After the call, Tanya went to her son's room and watched him sleep. The little boy's face looked peaceful under the soft light of his night lamp. She brushed his hair gently and smiled. For the first time since that awful night, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt hope. Over the next few days, her life slowly returned to normal. She worked, cooked, cleaned, and helped her son with homework. People at work noticed her calm energy returning. Her laughter sounded real again. One afternoon, her manager told her, "You've been through a lot, but I've never seen anyone handle it with as much grace as you." She smiled. "Thank you. I just try to keep going." But inside, she knew she wasn't the same person anymore. Something had changed. She was stronger now. She had faced fear and found courage she didn't know she had. She realized that her story wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about standing up for dignity, about refusing to be silenced. A week later, she received a letter in the mail. Official stationery, no return address. Inside was a short note that read, "Thank you for your cooperation. Your bravery has helped us open an important investigation. Justice takes time, but it always arrives. No signature, no details. Just that." Tanya folded the letter and placed it in her drawer beside her son's school pictures. Later that evening, Daniel called again. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Better every day." "Good," he replied. "Remember, this isn't over yet. But you're safe now. That's what matters." After they hung up, Tanya sat by the window again. The night was quiet, and the moonlight spilled across her small living room. She could hear her son's gentle breathing from the bedroom. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale completely. She didn't know all the details of what Daniel was doing behind the scenes. She didn't know which calls he had made, or how many people were now involved, but she trusted him, and in her heart she felt something shift. She wasn't powerless anymore. She had found her voice. In the following days, whispers started spreading through town. People talked about how 2 officers from the local precinct were suddenly under investigation. Some said it was corruption. Others said it was harassment. No one knew the full story. But Tanya did. She stayed quiet, kept to herself, and focused on what mattered, her job, her child, and her peace. Sometimes on her way to work, she'd pass the spot where it all began, the place where the flashing lights had filled her mirror that first night. She'd slow down for a moment, look at it, then keep driving. The fear was gone now. What remained was strength. The days passed slowly after the visit from the investigators. Tanya tried to keep herself busy with work and caring for her son, but deep down she sensed something bigger was happening. There was an energy in the air that she couldn't quite explain, like a storm forming quietly, waiting to break. Daniel hadn't told her much about what he was doing, but she knew his world moved in silence. He had always been that way, thoughtful, precise, never showing his hand until it was time. Tanya trusted him completely, even though part of her still felt nervous. One afternoon, she was at the diner pouring coffee for a group of regulars when her phone buzzed. She slipped it from her pocket and saw Daniel's name on the screen. Her stomach tightened. She excused herself and stepped outside into the alley behind the diner, where the air smelled faintly of rain and coffee beans. "Hey," she said softly. "Are you alone?" Daniel's voice was calm, but there was a sharpness underneath. "Yes, I'm on my break." "Good. Listen carefully," he said. "There's going to be some noise over the next few days. You might see things on the news. Don't react, don't post, don't talk to anyone about it. Understand?" Tanya frowned. "What kind of noise?" He hesitated for a moment. "The investigation has gone higher than expected. It's no longer just about those two officers. There are other names involved, people who thought no one was watching." Tanya's breath caught. "Daniel, what does that mean for me?" "It means you stay calm," he said. "You did nothing wrong. You told the truth. Now it's our job to make sure justice is done." She could hear typing in the background, faint voices speaking near him. "You're at work right now, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. "And I'm not leaving this desk until this is done." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were wet. "You always were stubborn," he chuckled softly. "Runs in the family." When she hung up, she stood there for a moment looking up at the cloudy sky. The breeze tugged at her hair. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she knew one thing. Her brother was fighting for her. That night she came home late. Her son was already asleep, his schoolbooks scattered across the small coffee table. She gathered them gently, placed them on his backpack, and kissed his forehead. Then she sat by the window with a cup of tea and turned on the news. Her heart jumped when she saw the headline, "Federal Probe Launched into Local Police Department Misconduct." She leaned closer. The reporter spoke calmly, describing allegations of racial profiling, unlawful arrests, and abuse of authority. No names were released, but she recognized the department instantly. Her hands trembled as she turned off the TV. Her breath came fast. It was real now. This wasn't just something Daniel was handling quietly behind the scenes. It had reached the public. She felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Fear that her name might somehow come out, and pride that her story was helping shine light on something much bigger than her. The next morning, the diner was buzzing with conversation. Everyone was talking about the news. Some were angry, some shocked, some saying it was about time someone did something. Tanya kept her head down, but her coworker nudged her gently. "You hear about that?" "Crazy stuff, huh?" She forced a small smile. "Yeah, it's something." She wanted to say more, but she couldn't. She had promised Daniel. A few hours later, during her lunch break, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. It read, "We know you spoke. Be careful who you trust." Her stomach dropped. Her hands went cold. She looked around nervously, half expecting to see someone watching her. She immediately called Daniel. He picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me," he said. She told him about the message, her voice shaking. There was silence for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, I want you to listen very carefully. Do not reply to that message. Do not delete it either. I'm sending someone to your apartment tonight to secure your phone and check for anything suspicious. You'll be safe, Tanya, I promise you that." Her voice was small. "Daniel, are they dangerous?" "Not to you," he said firmly. "They're scared. Scared people do stupid things. That's why I'm making sure they don't get the chance." That evening, after work, Tanya came home and found a black SUV parked discreetly near her building. Two men in plain suits stepped out as she approached. They smiled politely and showed their badges. "Miss Brown? We're here on behalf of your brother," one of them said. They were respectful, calm, and professional. They checked her phone, took some details, and assured her everything was fine. One of them even installed a secure line for her to reach Daniel directly. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Later that night, Daniel called. "Everything's clear," he said. "It was a scare tactic. Nothing more." "Why would they do that?" she asked quietly. "Because they know what's coming," he said, "and they can't stop it." The next few days moved like a movie. Federal agents began quietly reviewing records, calling in officers for questioning and collecting statements. The story grew larger, spreading beyond her town to national networks. People were outraged. Protesters gathered peacefully outside the police headquarters, holding signs that read, "Justice for All" and "Accountability Now." Tanya watched it all from a distance, never revealing her connection. She didn't want fame or attention, she just wanted peace. One morning, as she was getting ready for work, her phone rang again. This time it was a local reporter asking for a statement. She politely declined, saying she had nothing to say. But that night she received another call, from Daniel. "They're trying to guess who the woman is," he said, "but no one knows for sure. You're protected." "I don't want anyone hurt because of me," Tanya said softly. "Then you're already doing the right thing," he replied. His words comforted her. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to uncover years of misconduct, illegal searches, unreported complaints, even internal cover-ups. It was worse than anyone had imagined. Tanya read the updates carefully, her heart heavy. She wasn't angry anymore, just sad. Sad that so many people had suffered in silence like she almost did. One Sunday morning, she took her son to the park. The air was crisp and the leaves had started to turn golden. He ran ahead, laughing, chasing pigeons, while she sat on a bench watching. For the first time in a long while, she smiled without forcing it. A woman sitting nearby struck up a conversation. "You live around here?" "Yes," Tanya said. "Not far," the woman smiled. "Beautiful day, isn't it? My sister's been glued to the news about that police investigation. Terrible what happened to that woman." Tanya looked down, hiding a small, knowing smile. "Yes, terrible," she said quietly. She didn't say more. When she got home that afternoon, she found another letter waiting for her. It had no return address, but she recognized Daniel's handwriting instantly. She opened it and read the short note inside. "Things are moving faster now. Don't worry about me if I don't call for a few days. I'll be fine. Take care of yourself and the little one. You're stronger than you think." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her drawer beside the other one. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. Tanya went to work, came home, cooked dinner, and helped her son with homework. But every night before she slept, she looked at her phone waiting for Daniel's name to appear. Finally, one evening it rang. His voice sounded tired but calm. "It's done," he said simply. She sat up straight. "What do you mean?" "The department heads have been removed. Federal oversight is taking control. The officers who stopped you are facing charges. Internal files have been turned over to the Justice Division." Tanya felt tears welling up in her eyes. "It's really happening?" "Yes," he said softly. "It's over." There was silence between them for a moment. She wanted to say so many things. "Thank you, I love you, I'm sorry you had to do this," but the words got caught in her throat. Finally, she whispered, "You saved me." He paused. "No," he said gently. "You saved yourself. I just made sure people listened." After they hung up, Tanya sat quietly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She looked around her small apartment, the chipped table, the faded curtains, her son's drawings taped to the wall, and felt something shift inside her. She had spent years surviving. But now, for the first time, she felt free. The next morning, she woke up to a knock on her door. When she opened it, her neighbor was standing there holding a newspaper. "You see this?" the woman said, pointing at the front page. The headline read, "FBI Crackdown Brings Down Corrupt Police Network." There was a picture of Daniel shaking hands with senior officials. Tanya's heart swelled with pride and disbelief. She thanked her neighbor and closed the door, holding the paper close to her chest. Her son came running from his room. "What's that, Mom?" She smiled. "Just something about your uncle," he grinned. "He's on the news again?" She nodded. "Yeah, he's helping people." Her son hugged her tightly. "Like you did." That one sentence broke her. She hugged him back, tears falling silently. That evening, as the sun set, Tanya sat on her porch. The sky was streaked with shades of orange and purple. Her son played with his toy car on the steps. The sound of laughter floated through the quiet street. She thought about everything that had happened, when the fear, the anger, the sleepless nights, and now this peace. She knew the story wasn't over yet. There would be trials, hearings, and reports. But she also knew the hardest part was behind her. In her heart, she felt gratitude, not just for her brother, but for everyone who believed in justice, who spoke up, who refused to look away. The phone buzzed beside her. It was a message from Daniel. Heading out of town for a while. Big meeting ahead. Don't worry, I'll call soon. Love you, sis. She smiled softly and typed back, be safe. We're proud of you. Then she put the phone down and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. The world felt calm again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Because now she understood something deeply. Sometimes, one person's courage can change everything, and that night, as the cool breeze brushed her face and her son's laughter filled the air, Tanya finally allowed herself to breathe freely, knowing that justice had begun, and that the darkness she once feared had finally met its light. A few months had passed since the storm ended. Tanya's life was slowly returning to something that felt like peace. She had a new rhythm now, waking up early, making breakfast for her son, walking him to school, then heading to work. The quiet felt strange at first, almost too quiet, but she was learning to enjoy it. The weight she had carried for so long was gone. People around town were beginning to see her differently, too. Some smiled at her when she walked into the diner. Others greeted her kindly, not knowing the full story behind the calm look in her eyes. The investigation had changed many lives. Officers were removed, leadership replaced, and community trust was being rebuilt step by step. For Tanya, though, the change wasn't just outside, it was within. She had learned something about herself that she never knew before, that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, keep going. Her brother Daniel was busier than ever. His role in the federal crackdown had caught national attention. He wasn't one for fame or cameras, but the press followed him everywhere now. Whenever she saw him on TV, speaking in that calm, firm voice of his, she felt proud, but also worried. She knew his work was dangerous in its own quiet way. Power never liked being challenged. They hadn't seen each other in person since everything ended. He had promised to visit, but his schedule was unpredictable. Still, they called whenever they could. Those calls were short but warm. A few jokes, updates about her son, and reassurances that everything was fine. One Sunday morning, Tanya was cleaning the kitchen when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. Can I come by tonight? Need some peace and home cooking. She smiled wide. It had been too long. That evening, she made his favorite dinner, roasted chicken with mashed potatoes and cornbread. The house smelled like comfort. Her son was excited too, bouncing around, asking when his uncle would arrive. When Daniel finally walked in, the tiredness on his face was clear, but his smile was genuine. He hugged Tanya tightly, breathing deeply as if trying to pull calm from the air. Feels good to be home, he said quietly. She laughed. You make it sound like you live in another world, he chuckled. Sometimes it feels like I do. They sat down to eat. For the first time in months, they talked about normal things. Childhood memories, food, the silly things her son said. No investigations, no pressure, no headlines. Just family. After dinner, Daniel stepped outside onto the porch with a cup of coffee. The street was quiet except for the soft chirping of crickets. Tanya joined him. You okay? She asked softly. He took a slow sip before answering. I'm good. Just tired. We're closing more cases linked to what happened here. It's bigger than anyone expected. But I'm glad it started where it did. She looked at him, realizing what he meant. Because of me? He smiled faintly. Because of the truth. You stood up when you didn't have to. That started a ripple that changed everything. Tanya didn't respond right away. She just looked out at the stars and let the silence fill the space between them. Later that night, after Daniel had gone to sleep in the guest room, Tanya sat by the window. She thought about everything that had happened, not just to her but to everyone touched by that single night of injustice. Life had changed so much, and yet she still lived in the same small apartment, worked the same job, and tucked her son into the same bed. But inside, she wasn't the same woman anymore. The next morning, she woke up early to make breakfast. Daniel was already dressed, standing by the door, phone in hand. Work again? She teased. He nodded, slipping on his jacket. Duty calls. She handed him a thermos of coffee. Be careful. I always am, he said, smiling. Take care of yourself, too. And keep that boy of yours out of trouble. She laughed as he left, but part of her heart went with him. She knew his life wasn't easy. Fighting corruption meant standing in the fire every day. Weeks passed, and the seasons began to change again. The air grew cooler and the days shorter. Tanya found herself busier at the diner, serving travelers passing through town. Sometimes she caught people whispering about the big FBI story or praising the man who exposed it. She always listened quietly, a small smile playing on her lips. They didn't know the full truth, that the woman behind it all was the one pouring their coffee. One late evening, as she was closing up, a man walked into the diner. He wore a dark jacket and looked nervous. She offered her usual friendly smile. "Sorry, we're about to close, but I can get you something to go." The man shook his head. "I'm not here for food, I wanted to say thank you." Tanya froze. "I'm sorry?" He took a deep breath. "My brother was one of the people hurt by those officers years ago." Nobody believed him, but after the investigation everything came out. He got justice because someone spoke up first. "I don't know your story, but I heard rumors. If it was you..." "Thank you." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, tears forming in her eyes. When the man left, she sat in silence for a long time, holding on to that moment. She realized her pain had become someone else's hope, and that somehow made everything worth it. A few days later, Daniel called again, but this time his tone was more serious. "Tanya," he said, "I need you to stay alert for a while. There are some people who aren't happy with what we uncovered. Nothing to panic about, just be mindful." Her stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" "No," he said quickly. "Just standard caution. We rattled some cages, that's all." She didn't ask more. She trusted him. But that night she double-checked her locks before going to bed. The next week, Daniel didn't call. She told herself he was just busy. But as the days went by, her worry grew. On the 5th day, her phone finally buzzed with his name. "Hey," she said quickly, relief flooding her voice. "I'm okay," he said, sounding tired. "Things are intense. A lot of files, a lot of politics. But I'm hanging in." "You sound exhausted," he laughed lightly. "That's because I am. But don't worry, I'm good. Just wanted to hear your voice." They talked for a few minutes about her son's school and the upcoming holidays. When they hung up, Tanya sat quietly staring at her phone. Something in his voice lingered with her, that kind of weariness that went deeper than tiredness. The next morning she found a letter on her doorstep. It wasn't from Daniel this time. It had a federal seal on it. Her hand shook as she opened it. Inside was a short message. "You are invited to attend the public commendation ceremony, honoring individuals and families affected by the Bureau's reform initiatives. Your brother requested your presence." Tanya stared at it for a long time. A ceremony for her? She didn't know how to feel. She wasn't someone who liked attention, but the thought of standing beside Daniel filled her with pride. The ceremony was held 2 weeks later in a large federal building in the city. She wore her best dress, simple but elegant. Her son wore a small suit that was a little too big for him, but he looked proud. When Daniel walked out onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. He stood tall, calm, and confident, but when his eyes found Tanya in the audience, they softened. During his speech, he said something that she would never forget. Sometimes, courage doesn't come from power or training. It comes from those who face the world alone, yet still choose to do what's right. This story began with someone who refused to stay silent, and because of that, justice found its way. Tanya's eyes filled with tears. No one else knew who he was talking about, but she did. After the ceremony, they met briefly backstage. He hugged her tightly, whispering, "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. There's more to fix, more people to help." She smiled through her tears. "I know. Just promise me you'll rest sometimes." He laughed softly. "No promises. But I'll try." They said goodbye once again, each going back to their world, his full of duty and danger, hers filled with quiet strength and love. That night, when she returned home, Tanya stood by the window again, looking out at the city lights. Her son was asleep, clutching the small program from the ceremony in his hand. The world outside still had its problems. She knew that. But she also knew something else now. One voice, one act of courage, could change everything. She thought of her brother, of the night that started it all, of how fear had turned into fire, and fire into light. And as she turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, she smiled, a calm, peaceful smile, knowing that no matter how hard life got, she had already faced the worst and come out stronger. Because some battles aren't fought with weapons or anger. They're fought with truth, patience, and unbreakable hope. Months turned into a full year since that unforgettable night that had changed everything. Tanya's life had found its peace again, though not the same kind she had known before. This peace was different. It was earned. It was quiet, but full of meaning. She had grown stronger, not just in how she carried herself, but in how she looked at the world. She had stopped being afraid of what others thought. When she looked in the mirror now, she didn't just see a woman who survived. She saw a woman who fought back, who stood tall even when the world tried to push her down. The small diner where she worked had become a place of comfort. Regular customers came not just for food, but for her smile. She didn't talk about what she'd been through, but sometimes people could feel it in her calm voice. That strength that only comes from walking through fire and still finding light. Her son had grown too. He was more confident, happier, doing well in school. He had started talking about wanting to be a lawyer or maybe even a detective one day. Every time he said that, Tanya's heart swelled with pride. She never told him everything, but he knew enough to understand that his family had faced something hard and come through it together. Daniel's visits were rare, but when he did come, the house came alive with laughter. He was busier than ever, traveling, attending meetings, leading new investigations. He never spoke much about the details, but Tanya could tell he was carrying more weight now than ever before. One evening, she got a call from him while she was folding laundry. His voice was calm, but there was a quiet tiredness to it. "You doing okay?" he asked. She smiled softly. "I am. We're fine here." "What about you?" "I'm good. Just long days. But there's progress. Slowly, things are changing." She could tell he meant it. There was always a purpose behind his words. Before hanging up, he added, "I might have to go away for a while. A few months, maybe more. Nothing dangerous, just part of the job. Keep an eye on things here, all right?" "Always," she said. "Be safe." After that call, Tanya didn't hear from him for some time. She sent messages once in a while, simple things like, "We miss you," or "Dinner table feels empty." Sometimes he'd reply with a short line, sometimes not at all. But she knew he was okay. He always kept his word. Then one morning, while she was getting her son ready for school, a letter arrived. It had the same careful handwriting that she'd recognize anywhere. She tore it open gently. "Dear sis, I can't say much, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you. More than words can say. You've taught me that strength doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm. Tell my little man I'm thinking about him. I'll see you soon. Love always, D." She pressed the letter to her chest, smiling. Her eyes filled with quiet tears, and not of sadness, but of love. Life went on. Seasons changed. The pain that had once felt unbearable became a memory that reminded her how far she had come. The town itself had changed too. The police department now had new faces, people from different backgrounds, more training, and better leadership. The community felt safer. There were events now, gatherings between officers and residents, small conversations that built trust brick by brick. One day, Tanya was invited to speak at one of those community events. She almost said no. She didn't see herself as a speaker, just an ordinary woman. But Daniel encouraged her through a quick message. They need to hear from someone who lived it, not from a report. Just tell your truth. So she agreed. The event was held in a local park. The weather was warm, and families sat on blankets under trees while children played nearby. Tanya stood on a small wooden stage holding a microphone. Her heart pounded. But when she looked into the crowd and saw familiar faces, friends, neighbors, even some of the new officers, she felt calm. She took a breath and began. "I used to be scared of speaking up," she said simply. "I thought no one would believe me, or worse, that speaking up would make things harder. But I learned that silence can be heavier than fear. And when we find the courage to speak, even if our voice shakes, we can change more than we ever imagine." The crowd listened quietly. She didn't talk about everything that had happened. She didn't need to. The strength in her eyes said it all. Afterward, people came up to thank her. Young women, older men, families. Some shared their own stories. Others just wanted to shake her hand. Tanya smiled and hugged those who cried. She realized then that healing didn't happen alone. It happened when people shared their pain and turned it into purpose. That night, she sat outside her apartment looking at the stars, feeling peaceful. Her son came and sat beside her. "Mom," he said, leaning against her shoulder, "why do people say you're brave?" She smiled. "Because I didn't give up, I guess," He thought for a moment. But you were scared, right? Very scared, she admitted softly. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are. He nodded, thinking about that. Then he said, Uncle Daniel said you're his hero. Tanya laughed lightly, brushing his hair. He says that just to make me smile. But it's true, he said with childlike certainty. Her eyes softened. Maybe, but he's mine too. A few weeks later, Daniel finally returned. He looked thinner, more tired, but his eyes were bright. When he hugged her, he held on a little longer than usual. They spent that evening talking about everything. The changes in town, her speech, her son's new dream of joining law school. Daniel listened with quiet pride. At one point, Tanya asked him softly, Do you ever wish things had gone differently? He thought about it, staring out the window. Sometimes. But then I think, if things hadn't happened the way they did, we wouldn't have seen how strong we could be. We wouldn't have seen what truth can do when it finally has a voice. She nodded. It's strange, isn't it? How something so painful can lead to something so right? Daniel smiled faintly. That's life, sis. It breaks you, then builds you stronger. The next morning, before leaving again, Daniel left a note on her kitchen table. It said, Never forget who you are. The world needs people like you, the quiet fighters, the ones who don't give up. You showed me what courage really looks like. She kept that note with the others, tucked safely in a small box. Years passed. Her son grew into a fine young man. He graduated with honors and stood proudly beside her, ready to start his career in law. Daniel attended his graduation, clapping the loudest in the room. After the ceremony, he pulled Tanya aside and said with a grin, He's got your fire. She laughed softly. And your stubbornness. They stood together for a while, watching the young graduates throwing their caps into the air, laughter echoing across the field. Later that evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Tanya looked around the table, her son, Daniel, a few close friends. The air was filled with laughter and warmth. It struck her how far they had all come, from fear and darkness to light and love. After everyone left, she walked out onto the porch one last time that night. The stars were bright and the air was calm. She thought about her journey, the night that started it all, the pain that turned into strength, the silence that turned into a voice heard by many. She whispered quietly to herself, We made it, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to look back, because she knew now, real strength doesn't come from power or titles. It comes from the heart of those who refuse to stay silent. It comes from love, from truth, from the small acts of courage that can change the world.